Did you know in the year 2000 the world had 325 billionaires? We also had a billion people living in abject poverty, never a reliable source of clean water, nutritious food, or proper shelter. They dealt with tuberculosis, malaria, HIV/AIDS, and a wide variety of other diseases, the complications of which were made much worse by a lack of hospitals, doctors, or even medicines. They had poor roads, few schools, no sanitation systems. Violence and fear were a part of everyday life. The harshest impact on this level of poverty is always felt first and worst by women and children. That's why the world came together in the year 2000 and set the Millennium Development Goals, a program to be run through the United Nations where we would finally invest in the infrastructure that would take care of hunger and poverty issues, health and education, and promote gender equality in the poorest countries of the planet. The plan was to eradicate this level of poverty in a 10 to 15 year period. Zip ahead to 2012. The world now has 1,400 billionaires. 4 times as many billionaires in a 12-year period. And yet we still have 1 billion people struggling with some degree of utter poverty. The Millennium Development Goals weren't reached. The ones that were reached were sometimes aided by other groups like the Gates Foundation, the Carter Foundation, the One Campaign, and others. But due to a lack of funding, many of the goals have not been reached. Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, a world-renowned economist, has traveled the world for decades advising emerging countries on how to put in proper free market infrastructure and policies in order to bring their country up into the globalized economy, but bring their poverty-stricken up with them. He's had great success in Bolivia, India, the Far East, and other countries. In Dr. Sachs's book, The End of Poverty, he's come to the conclusion that the world really needs to invest about $80 billion per year in order to eradicate the worst forms of poverty around the world. Right now, the world, through our tax bases, provides $50 billion in foreign aid and development funding, $20 billion of which is earmarked for the poorest of the poor countries. $80 billion needed, $20 billion provided. The rich get richer, the poor don't get richer. This is not a good balance. We shouldn't be surprised, though. A very conservative estimate of wealth distribution around the globe will show 20% of the population controls 80% of the wealth, leaving 20% of the wealth for 80% of the population. $4 out of $5 for the small group, $1 out of $5 for the huge group. Now, on this side of the equation, the 80% of the wealth, a lot of that wealth is tied up in the stock market. You know how it works. You take your hard-earned money, invested in a corporation. They make anything from widgets to warheads. They sell their widgets, realize a profit. They pay you a dividend, pay the wages of their employees, retained earnings for the company and the owners. This is how wealth is created. In comes the government. They tax your dividends 20, 30%, tax the wages 25%, corporate tax 20 to 40%. There's even 5 to 15% sales tax on the widgets to warheads. This is where we raise the revenue to give us roads and schools, hospitals, bridges, clean water, good food, armies, police, and all the infrastructure that separates our world from the poverty-stricken world. Now, within the stock market, there's a special trade. They don't make anything. They make money. They have money making money. They operate in the currency exchange market. They trade in financial stocks, bonds, debentures, hedge funds, and actual currency. 20 billion US dollars, over to the yen. Stays there a fraction of a second, back to the euro, back to the US dollar. All done by computer programs that just pick when the currencies are going to be doing a little bit of an up. 20 billion, 50 billion at a time. In fact, in the run of a day, the currency trade market trades $1.5 trillion every day. $1.5 trillion, more than the gross domestic product annually for most countries on earth. Who are they that operate in the currency market? Banks. Big banks and financial institutions are the main players. Yep, the same banks that are at the center of the financial meltdown that brought about the recession we're in that doesn't seem to want to go away. Maybe you lost your savings. Maybe you lost your retirement fund. Maybe you lost your home or your job. But not to worry, we as good citizens went out and borrowed trillions of dollars to put back under the banks and get them back on their feet. And they're back on their feet. It's kind of hard to get a loan out of them, but they're paying themselves tens of billions of dollars again in bonuses for a job well done. But there's something especially attractive about the currency exchange market. No tax. While this money is in the currency exchange floating around the world at $1.5 trillion per day, there's no income tax, sales tax, corporate tax, or any other kind of tax applied to bring tax revenue back into the system to help with the infrastructures that we talked about earlier. Now, in the 1970s, Nobel laureate Dr. James Tobin suggested maybe we should put a little bit of a tax on this currency exchange market. His point in doing it was to slow down the market a bit. $20, $30, $50 billion in and out of your economy flashing like that is very hard on your currency. We saw in later years the currency collapses in Brazil, Mexico, and the Far East for just this reason. Now, Dr. Tobin wasn't talking about the 20 or 30% tax you paid on your dividends, or the 25% that they paid on their wages, or the corporate 20 to 40%. He wasn't even talking about the sales tax of 5 to 15. He wasn't talking about a 1% tax. Over the ensuing decades, people working on the so-called Tobin tax have come to a consensus rate of 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% as being a fair rate of tax to put on the currency trade market in order to slow it down, but take the funds and use them in the fight against poverty around the world. 1/2 of 1/10 of 1%. How much money would this raise? If all the major economies in the world imposed a currency transaction tax of 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% on the currency trade that's done each day, it would bring hundreds of billions of dollars in tax revenue, easily supplying the $80 billion per year needed to make poverty a thing of the past. What to do with the excess revenue? Any surplus revenue is returned to the domestic economies of the countries that participated in a currency transaction tax. Imagine billions of new revenue dollars coming into your own country to help with poverty, homelessness, women's issues, family violence, climate change, mental health. The list goes on. Finally, a source of revenue to cure some of the ills that we've had chronically underfunded for decades. Much discussion has gone on over the past 4 decades concerning the Tobin tax. It's been variously referred to over the years as a financial transaction tax, a currency transaction tax, or the Robin Hood tax in Europe. It's actually been endorsed by dozens of countries, including Great Britain, France, Germany, Japan, and Brazil. It's also been endorsed by many international financial and economic professionals, including Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and George Soros. It's endorsed as a fair tax with a fair goal that won't impede the currency market in any appreciable way. The biggest hurdle to getting a currency transaction tax enacted is a lack of public awareness. Even when the topic does make the news, it gets buried in the business section of the newspaper or used as a small add-on to a bigger economic story in the radio or TV world. Even when it is reported, it's more in the line of how the banking and business world has a distaste for this new tax. Go figure! This is where we come in. CTT Now is dedicated to spreading information and awareness of the need for a currency transaction tax now, hence the acronym. Without popular pressure to push the political initiative to get the tax put in place, we are destined to put up with poverty and other social ills into the future. We have an easy solution right under our nose, a currency transaction tax to raise the funds to combat poverty issues. We need to impress on our elected officials, regardless of their level or their political stripe, that you want a currency transaction tax enacted to fight the worst forms of poverty around the planet. Be a part of the generation that made poverty go away. Maybe we can get this level a little bit more like that, where it should be. Thank you.